Welcome to An Evening with Michael Ryan. A couple of quick introductions here. Mr. Bill Wheeler will be our moderator, interviewer for this evening. For those who don't know, he was a founding partner of Leith Wheeler Investment Counsel in 1982. Previously, he and Murray Leith ran Pacific Management Limited. Mr. Wheeler entered the investment business with a major Toronto-based financial institution 20 years ago and returned to Vancouver to join Pemberton Securities as a senior investment analyst in 1976. And yes, I would say the 20 years ago is a bit of a misprint.
I think you got an old one.
Mr. Wheeler's a CFA charter holder and a graduate of UBC with a Bachelor of Commerce in 19-something. And now a bit about Michael Ryan. He was CFA Society Vancouver's founding member and second president from 1966 to 1968. He had a long career in the investment industry, starting in 1953 when he worked as a sales assistant with Hall Securities Limited. From there, moved on to positions with Pemberton Securities, Ryan Investments, and Leith Wheeler Investment Counsel, where he stayed for 14 years prior to his retirement in 2003. Over the years, he also held positions on a number of boards, including the UBC Sauder School of Business, Faculty Advisory Board, Director of the Financial Analyst Foundation, which was the predecessor to AMER, which is the predecessor to CFA Institute, the Vancouver Stock Exchange as Director and President, the Securities Regulation Commission, Vancouver International Film Festival, and the Investment Dealers Association of Canada. Mr. Ryan holds a Bachelor of Commerce from UBC and is a Fellow of the Canadian Securities Institute. Without further ado, I'd like Mr. Wheeler and Mr. Ryan to please stand up and take a seat.
So, is the mic on? You okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
He left out the first firm I was fired from.
What a night. You know, I look out here and half the people in this room have worked either for or with Mike Ryan. And I mean, I see all these tables of Leith Wheeler. I sure hope Jim made them all pay their own way. And a table of Pemberton Securities. Now, Pemberton Securities hasn't even existed for 20 years, and here's a whole table of them. That's called, that's called corporate culture. The company's gone, and the people are still back there. Yeah. So, maybe just start from the beginning, Mike. We'll spend a little time here. We'll just chat and then probably have a 15-minute question period or so at the end. We should be 3/4 of an hour and then a 15-minute question period or something.
Okay, don't use too much of the time yourself.
Yeah, there goes 5 minutes. So your first job was at a company called H.J. Bird.
That's correct.
Maybe
yeah.
you could just tell us how that, what you did there and how it came to be that you got that job.
Well, it just shows you how primitive everything is. I got the job because Art Phillips had a much older brother who was an investor, and he traded with H.J. Bird. So Harry Bird, you know, there was about 40 or so independent stockbrokers back in those days, very small companies. Harry Bird came out of the Air Force, entered a financial post contest to run a portfolio, and he won the best results across Canada. So he decided or confirmed that he was a genius and opened this firm. So I walked in there, and the desk trader was going to become an assistant to Harry's partner. And so the first day, I'm the desk trader for H.J. Bird and Company. It was just kind of unbelievable. Anyway, Harry's partner unfortunately died after about 2 or 3 weeks, and the police had come in to tell Harry that they'd found Sid's body, and so Harry ushered them out to the door and turned around, came into the trading desk and said, "We won't need your services any longer. Peter's going back on the desk." So I was without a job. A guy down the lane had told me the Hall Securities were looking for someone. I knew they were looking for someone permanent, but I had nothing else to do. So I thought I'd wander over to Hall Securities, passed a mining promoter on the way over there that I'd met, and he said, "Oh, hi, Mike." He said, "Have you heard about, I don't know what the name of the company was, Copper Gulch or something, their new number 6 hole, they've pulled 170 feet of 6% lead, 7% copper. I'm going to be rich, I'm going to be rich." And I said, "Pat, that's wonderful. I just got fired and I got to go over and talk to somebody." He says, "Mike, I'm going to be rich." There was some empathy missing here. So I walked into Hall Securities and said, "I'd like to speak to Mr. Hall, please." And the reception says, "Do you want FERCI?" I said, "I beg your pardon? Do you want FERCI?" I said, "I want to see Mr. Hall." "Do you want Mr. F.E. Hall or Mr. C.I. Hall?" I didn't know there were 2 halls. I said, "The one that lives on 2nd Avenue. That's all I knew. So anyway, I went in, and he said, no. He's a very avuncular guy. He was a really nice guy to talk to, nice old man. And he said, "We want someone permanent." And he wanted to know where we lived. And I said, "We just live by." "How'd you hear about it?" I said, "Jimmy Tate." "Oh, Jimmy Tate's such a nice man." And then the phone rang, and he told me he couldn't possibly hire me. And he put his hand over the phone. He said he's reaching for the Financial Post Survey of Mines, which is how we had information in those days. It was outdated by the time it was published, of course. Put his hand over the phone. He says, "These clients phone up, and you got to give them something. They want to know about Silver Gulch Mines." I said, "Oh, did you hear about the number 6 hole?" He thought, "My God, this kid knows everything." So he hired me, and so the next morning I walked in, and I was to work on the desk with Bill Taylor, and Bill's quite shy, and he was not looking forward to having somebody sit beside him. So I walked in, and he said, "This is the Toronto phone, this is the Vancouver phone, I'm going out for coffee." So I was the head desk trader for Hall Securities. So that's how it all started.
What was the nature of the business scene in Vancouver then? Is it a mining promotion market, or?
Well, first of all, everything was very primitive. There was no financial reporting in the Vancouver Sun, very little on the Globe and Mail. The only paper that carried anything was the Financial Post, and it was a weekly, and that's where we got all of our information. Brokers had, most of the ones that catered to the public, had a blackboard along one wall, and we're talking size here. This would be something 5 feet by 40 feet, had all of the lists of all the symbols on it, the young women walking on this raised pedestal and chalking up. They're called board markers. They're watching the quotes go by and put the quotes up. It was just unbelievable how primitive and how little real help there was. There was a lot of mining promotion going on, a lot of colorful promoters, which we'll talk about shortly, no doubt. It was a very unsophisticated. Nobody knew what the gross national product was. They call it the gross domestic product now. That's all changed. Everybody knows all these things. And nobody knew what the Federal Reserve Board did. That's all changed. Now the Federal Reserve Board doesn't know what they do, so that's what's happened. What sort of other aspects are you thinking of there?
Well, you mentioned there was like 40 firms in Vancouver. Would there be a small contingent of stock promoter firms there, and then a investment grade business as well, or is Vancouver really a a Wild West. We're talking the 50s, are we not? Like
Yep.
early
yep,
50s or
yeah. I
mid-50s?
graduated in '52. I worked from '51 and '52 in brokers' offices. Yeah. There were a few national houses, not many. There was Western City and Pemberton Bond, as it was then known, changed its name to Pemberton Securities. What was their name? So there were sort of three, Odlum Brown was going then. So there were sort of three firms, local firms, trying to do a job for individual investors. There was about 40 firms trying to do a job on individual investors.
And would there be the Wood Gundys and Green Shields and people like that, or firms like that?
But yeah, they were here in a various, I don't think Green Shields was here then, I'm not sure, but there was 4 or 5 of the national houses that were not terribly active. They were also trying to do a quality job. In those days, if you went to a cocktail party and got talking about who handles your portfolio, you'd never say it was someone in Vancouver. It was Montreal. Montreal was where the money was managed, and then Toronto was taking that over. So that part of the business, it was there. It was almost half and half in terms of dollar value, but in terms of number of firms, it was almost 90-10. 90 of them were doing these promotions, mining stocks, some oil stocks, a lot of mining stocks.
Mm-hmm. And how would you go about doing research in those days? Like today, you'd be listening to conference calls and that sort of thing. What was the process, and what were the sources of information then?
Well, you had the Financial Post surveys, which they had the survey of oil, survey industrial, survey of funds, and the survey of mines that I mentioned before them. Yeah, that was background. The Financial Post had cards on each of the main industrial stocks in Canada, and those cards would be sent in every week if there was a change in something company. You'd have to file them in this box. You might have seen those old boxes on tables. And that's about the only place you got information from. Well, Pemberton's, as an example, had never had an analyst fly anywhere to talk to a company in the East or anything. It just was too much money.
Huh. So would you do corporate interviews? Like how did you go about researching a company for these firms you work at?
Yeah, I can still remember one of my first major interviews, and this was Pemberton's, as I say, I never sent anybody anywhere. They sent me to Calgary to interview some of the oil companies because Bobby Brown was sort of the big operator in the oil industry there, so I had to go and interview him. And so he sits me down at this big, long, beautiful table, and he'd had other analysts in before, and takes the annual report, slides it across the table to me and says, here's the annual report in case you want to see it. And so I met the challenge. I just folded it up and said, okay, if you want to start with the annual report, there's some notes in the auditor's footnotes that I don't understand. I want you to explain them for me. We became very good friends after that. But he was just used to, analysts were so unsophisticated, and a lot of them would go in and hadn't even looked at the annual reports. I mean, he was just pissed off with all these people. So yeah, I did some of that interviewing, and just a lot of going through the Financial Postcards and trying to find companies that looked interesting. I subscribed to the Graphoscope, which came out
I remember that.
Once a month, and I was always thought that you got a better feeling for a company if you could see a picture of what the stock had been doing over time. And of course, Art Phillips was very big on following graphs. Before they'd invented the word momentum, he was using that. So I was influenced by that to a tiny degree. It was just so unsophisticated. It was unbelievable.
Would you have a quote machine?
I didn't have one. There would be one in the office, which reminds me of the quote machines then. They had these little wheels that printed stuff out very rapidly, and it came across a tape, and it came across a magnifying glass and up through a big screen, and all of the public brokers had that, and the stock exchange floor had that. One of the small firms was R. Galletly and Company, and it was quite typical. Bob Galletly owned the company, was also worked on the floor all day long. That's what he did. So he had a quote machine, and he took the head off the quote machine, so he didn't have to wait for the tape to get to the magnifying glass. He had about a 5 or 6 second lead on all the other traders on the floor, and if he saw a Canadian Atlantic trading at $4.50 and it was still offered at $4.40 in Vancouver, he'd take the shares, and he'd make $5 here or $10 there, and that was his basic business that he did. The salespeople in those days, like I was in at Hall Securities, the salespeople did very poorly. The commission rate on the lower priced stocks was 2%. I mean, it was just huge commission rates, but a lot of the orders were for $100 or $200. A salesman that made $20 in a day thought, wow, I really had quite a lucky day. Everything was at a very tiny scale.
I guess the guy who took the top off that quote machine was called a high-speed trader, eh?
yeah. That's about as fast as you got.
So, a delay on the financial information because you waited for the financial postcards to come in. The quotes are slow. You don't have conference calls. Is the market less efficient then than it is now? Is it easier to make money then than it is now because of those issues?
Not that I know of.
It was still hard to make money then.
Yeah. Very few people recorded investment results. Mutual funds were really quite unknown when I started, but started to get known. But to have performance figures, just nobody had them. Nobody did that. So I really don't know. In those days, there were mostly fixed trusts rather than mutual funds. They'd set up a big trust, get some wealthy people to put in $20 million or something, which was a magnificent sum of money. And then they list the stock, and the stock would trade. Usually it would go down to about a 30% discount. And that's where most of the funds were. And again, nobody checked how well they were doing.
In the 50s, people were skeptical towards stocks. I guess still left over from the Depression, and we had yields on stocks exceeding yields on bonds. And but you've always been a stock guy. Why? Why back then were you oriented to stocks and not bonds?
I really don't know. There was no history in the family that way. My grandmother used to take us down to either myself or my sister to get us off my mother's hands, and she'd go into Nance and Rothwell. That's where she had her $100 or $200 invested, and I just was fascinated by the environment, about the ticker tape coming out and the people writing up quotes on the board. And I'd ask my dad questions about how does the market work, and I wasn't very old, but I realized he didn't know. So it was just there, and Art Phillips and I grew up together, and we were always trying to think of some way to make $1 without having to lift anything heavy, and we used to try to beat the horse races and everything. I was just oriented that way.
After Hall, you went back to Pemberton's and then on to Stevenson Ryan. What was Stevenson Ryan? And
Well, Jerry left Pemberton's to form Stevenson Donaghy, and Jerry was the smartest, tough businessman I've ever known. He was just incredible, his instincts and everything. Unfortunately, he was too tough and sometimes hard to get along with. Anyway, he didn't get along with Donaghy for a while, So he wanted a new partner, so I joined him, and we did it for 3 years. I got to realize we just aren't going down the path I wanted to go down. So I said, Jerry, we should sit down and talk about this. And he just said, okay, clean out your desk. and 10 minutes later, Stevenson and Ryan broke up. So I phoned my lawyer and said I wanted to start an investment firm. And again, to show you how informal and friendly, everybody knew everybody. Jerry wouldn't pay the money out to me that I had in the firm immediately. So when we wanted to join the stock exchange, I didn't have the $70,000. I didn't have that much to. And the exchange said, "That's fine, Mike. We know you. Give us what you can, and when you get your money from Jerry, then you can pay us the rest of it." So that's how we became a member of the Vancouver Stock Exchange.
Just going back a bit to your history as a research analyst, do you have a mentor along the way? Like how did you learn about this? Was there somebody who guided you in the early years, or?
No, not in that form. I did have a mentor, but I was too stupid to know he was a mentor. And they hadn't invented the word then. So, but one of the senior clients at Pemberton's always talked to the senior director, and then he always wanted to talk to me because he liked trying to tell me to smarten up. And he gave me some advice, which you'll remember. The first time I had to fire somebody, I really found it pretty stressful, and I told him that. And he said, "I'm surprised to hear such a stupid remark come out of a smart man like you." And he said, "When you fire somebody, you've got to know that it's the best thing for them. And if you aren't sure of that, you're making a mistake." And that was wonderful mentor advice, and I used it 100 times.
Half those people that you work with are here, have experienced that.
Well, it's amazing. I used to quite frequently pass people on the sidewalk and say, "Mike, I don't know if you remember me, you fired me. It was the best thing that ever happened to me," and it really was true. Yeah, no, but we just, Art and I, Barron's had a special on financial books. There was 9 of them. Art and I jointly bought the whole package and read them all. I read The Battle for Investment Survival by Gerald N. Loeb. And he said in there, the best way to invest for the long term is to invest for the short term. And he made a very good point if it's just step by step by step. It isn't that you go here and you know what's going to happen 10 years out. So those things kind of influence, but really, Bill, I look back and I shouldn't have been advising people. I didn't know anything.
When I was in university, I was aware of Ryan Investments, and it had a great reputation in this city for just being a firm that was with it and on the money. The 60s had been great for stocks, and your firm was doing wonderfully. I remember in my graduating year, the 2 top students in my year were able to get jobs in Vancouver, and one of them went to a little startup called Phillips Hager and North, and the other one, who's Ken Shields, got a job with you, and that was a pretty exciting firm for Ken to get a start with. It was a really amazing firm. Maybe you can just tell us what was the niche and a bit about Ryan Investments.
Well, I think one thing that was important, and this will be flattering to Ken, is that we're trying to really hire outstanding people all the way along. We tried to hire really outstanding salespeople. We wanted everybody to be top. And I wanted to have a firm where we were really studying stocks. We were really trying to come up with some good ideas and just really trying to do something for the clients. So that was our drive, and it was working because we only had 1 or 2 problem employees for years that just didn't work out. Really there's some that didn't fit and went on to better things. There were just a couple that were bad apples, but that's all. We had just had very high quality people.
Mm-hmm. And the niche was mostly U.S. stocks, wasn't it?
Well,
investment grade, growing growth type stocks. Was it?
We drifted that way. Murray Leith was doing the most of the research for us. Dave Reed was also working with him, and so we drifted in. We were doing a lot in U.S. stocks before any other broker in town was. Merrill Lynch was coming to town, and everybody warned us, oh boy, you're going to be out of business with Merrill Lynch here, because that's kind of one of your shticks, that you're doing these U.S. stocks. And I said, no. The best place to sell cameras is next door to the best camera store in town. That's where the foot traffic is. I said, Merrill Lynch is going to increase the popularity of American stocks. And boy, was it true. That was a really big boost for our firm because of what we were doing.
There's a few tables here that would be surprised to hear that Murray Leith was a growth stock investor. But he was also a quick learner.
Yeah, he did very, very detailed research. He got very interested in the lumber and forest products areas and the banking area. Even before Leith Wheeler was formed, he really sort of specialized on that at Leith Wheeler. And he just looked around for stocks and did a lot of work and came up with a lot of ideas.
Mm-hmm. Are there some? I have a stock I want to ask you about, but I wanted to see if you have some that stood out from that era that you can think of and relate to us.
I don't really know. What do you think? What is stuff we recommended or stuff that was going on? Or
Yeah, well, this is the ones we were involved with. I know one spectacular story of a local company that I think Ryan Investments actually underwrote was National Student Marketing, which
we participated. We weren't the head underwriter or anything in that. Yeah, now those two local guys, were they twins or brothers?
I think they were brothers, yeah.
Brothers, yeah. National Student Marketing, and it's an interesting one. It was a total fraud, which we didn't know. And I'd like to, because some of the other frauds that went on are quite amusing. And they got written up in the Wall Street Journal and probably in Forbes or some of those magazines.
It was a fabulous company before it was discovered.
Yeah. And they were boasting about their big operation in Los Angeles, and so the press wanted to go because they had some reporters down there interested in it, so they came and they had a big, huge room with all these people working away, and it was really impressive. They were all actors. They'd hired them for the day, and the next day the office was cleaned out. But I think the guy in Washington was even worse than the two Vancouver brothers. I think he was kind of the mastermind of the thing. It was totally fraudulent.
I fell for that fraud. I didn't own the stock, but again, I was a student at UBC in commerce, and they came and made a presentation to the commerce finance people, and just the room was excited at this company. It was playing the baby boom, and they were selling Time magazine subscriptions to university students, and then they bought a 747 airplane or whatever the version was in those days, and took students to Europe and so they had the whole waterfront covered with this big baby boom bulge, and people bought it hook, line.
Yeah.
And I think Ryan Investments was out of it by the time it hit the fan, but it was quite a story.
Well, there's another one, Harvard Industries. That was another one that got written up in all the major newspapers. The scion of a very prominent American family was in it, and a former the head of the government in Canada, what am I trying to think of here? Prime Minister, a former Prime Minister was in it. They were developing a machine that took potato powder and turned it into French fries. And it was going to revolutionize the whole industry. They got an order for tens of millions of dollars over a 10-year period in Brazil to buy these machines. The stock was going up. It got up. I've forgotten what the maximum price on that thing was. They installed a machine out at UBC, and unfortunately, it smoked so badly that it set off all the fire alarms. The fire department was called and they had to vacate the building. The promoter said it was very successful. The students loved the chips. Where is it in here? Well, I just can't see it. Anyway, that again was, I mean, just stop and think about it. Would a company in Brazil sign a 10-year contract to buy a potato chip machine? But they put out these reports. They had all the people promoting it in the background. It was a total fraud. One of the most active promoters was Murray Pezim. Maybe this room, some of you will remember him, but Murray was born in 1923. He was on 63 mining company boards, and most of these would be his promotions. He probably had 3 of them that worked out, but they worked out hugely. Murray ultimately became a multimillionaire. Very funny guy. Yeah, he had Hemlo gold mines. You remember that one in Ontario, and Pyramid in BC. He made a lot of money trading Denison mines and Stampede Oil. So Murray, he was bankrupt 3 times. He's a very funny guy. He said, I don't know what bankrupt is. Bankrupt means you have less than $100,000. He said, he was actually $99,000 short of that when one of his bankruptcies. And then he was charged with insider trading by the superintendent of brokers, Wade Naismith. And this is what he said, which is interesting because some things are going on currently. He said that Wade Naismith is an incompetent idiot, power-hungry schmuck. Did I forget twerp? Yeah, and he talked about a lot of people that way, and this guy could have become president of the United States. That's the kind of the way he talked. What was the other thing? Oh yeah, he had a roast, and they had Milton Berle. Do you remember Milton Berle? He was one of the great prominent stand-up comics of the time, and he just said what a great man Murray Pezim was. He said, because of Murray Pezim, I now have $14 million. Before I met him, I had $30 million. Just those kind of jokes. Pezim loved to tell a joke about there was a true story. Apparently, somebody was up on fraudulent promotion of a stock and was found guilty, and the judge was reading out the judgment. And he said, so the jury has found you totally guilty of this fraudulent promotion, and we'd all like to get some stock on your next deal. And then, Harry Mall, Harry Mall, he had cross-Pacific pearls. He said he was, and these were all promotions on the Vancouver Stock Exchange. He was going to grow the biggest pearl in the world. It was the clam was already on display in Hawaii. The clam was going to be about the size of a bowling ball. It was going to be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, so you had to get in on his stock pretty quickly. He actually had some clams which were had pearls in them. It turns out the pearls had been put in there the night before. And the clam in Hawaii wasn't even seeded. So we had that promotion, and again, these things, that one didn't get on any of the American exchanges, but that sort of crap was going on, and I say of all these brokers, most of them were promoting mining stocks had escrow stock, which they'd buy for a tenth of a penny or something, and it would eventually go public at 10 cents or 20 cents. Of course, you can't sell the escrow stock, but you didn't know where all that stock was coming from, the Bahamas and everywhere, because they were all putting it. It was just what everybody in those promotional houses did. So that half of the exchange was pretty unsavory.
Yeah. In the early days of Leith Wheeler, our office was in the Stock Exchange Tower, as was Murray Pesham's. And he's the only guy I've ever seen get on an elevator, and instead of turning around and looking at the door, he stood with his back to the door and looked at the people. And by the time we got to our office on the 15th floor, he had the names of everybody on that elevator. He was just so outgoing.
And what did you buy? Yeah, that was him. He said he had a wonderful way with women. His father he was born up very poor in Toronto, and his father had 2 pharmacies, but they only sold liquor. And then eventually he had to close that business. He had a meat market, and Murray said that the customers, every woman that came in, I told her how beautiful she was, how well dressed she was, how it was pleasure she came in. He said they all wanted to buy meat from me, and he was that kind of guy.
So on the subject of the Vancouver Stock Exchange, when you were at Pemberton Securities for the second time, you took the job as, I think it was chairman, not president, chairman, right, of the Vancouver Stock Exchange. When I saw that appointment, I thought, well, there's lipstick on the pig, you being the lipstick. And so why did you ever take that job?
Well, I was on, George Wright got a bunch of us to run for office, because the old group on the exchange had been there for years and years, and we won. We got all of our people elected. I was the vice president to start out with, and one of the old hands who had been on the board all those years phoned up and said, "Mike, I just want you to know, I'm happy you guys won. It's time for a change. There's no hard feelings." I was just astounded that he'd phoned me on that, which he did. So we wanted to start working on cleaning up the exchange, making it more respectable. The superintendent brokers, see, the exchange has no police powers. They couldn't investigate people. They couldn't do any of these things. They could have done more, and we intend to do more. The superintendent brokers did not do their job. What was one of the other bodies, the Investment Dealers Association wasn't concerned with it, but the RCMP should have been doing a lot of the investigation. They finally appointed an officer to be in the exchange all the time. He had no understanding of finance. It was just hopeless. So nobody was doing this job. We just thought, we're going to change it. We brought in a more professional president to run the exchange. Our first one failed, and we got a second one in. And then when Rusty Gopel and that gang took over the exchange, they brought in Don Hudson, which was another step forward to getting a real businessman in to run the exchange. So maybe you think we were too optimistic, but we just felt that this should be a better exchange for Vancouver. It was getting to be a bit of a scandal for Vancouver.
Yeah, I wondered why the province didn't put some teeth in the Securities Commission. We had Adrian Duplessis writing stories and David Baines writing stories. The Forbes finally did one where they tagged it the scam capital of the world, and you'd think that there would have been, maybe the die was cast then. It wasn't retrievable, but I always wonder why the province didn't take a more aggressive approach, as it seems to have gone to Toronto, and they've done a decent job with it.
Yeah, I just can't answer. They just didn't do anything, and a lot of it was out of ignorance, but stuff that was going on was clearly criminal. And nobody was doing anything or investigating. When that Scam Capital World ABC television came out here and did a television program on it, I mean, they got a video of a woman on the phone just stealing money from a client and being very proud of herself, for she was so skillful doing this. a psychology professor out at university who's written 2 books on sociopaths, just said that the Vancouver promotional scene was a bunch of sociopaths or psychopaths, kind of interchangeable, which was the case. And you're right, they didn't do anything. We thought at least we could clean up or improve the administration of the exchange itself.
Yeah. On another subject, in the course of your career, there's been a change in women in the business, from 100% back office to still dominated by men, but still quite a number of women are in the business. Can you just talk about that and where you saw that beginning to change?
Well, we were the first firm to hire a woman and make her a trader. And she was a trader on our desk, Noni Ojero. The guys were just awful to her. I just couldn't believe they could be such animals. And I said, Noni, we got to take you off. And no, she said, I can take it. I'm going to do this. And no, so we shifted her, and she was terrific. So she did a much better job for us in another area. But that was the start of some kind of breakthrough. And then, of course, at Phillips Hager and North, their trader was a female, and of course became very wealthy by the stock she accumulated, and became sort of the role model for all the women in finance who wished to get a job like she had. Now all this stuff just seems so quaint, but that's the way it was back then. Yeah,
I remember the first couple of female brokers at Pemberton, and they had a pretty tough time of it.
Yes.
One of them is here tonight.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, a survivor. Yeah. Mike, do you think 4 guys could go out and start a sell-side brokerage firm today, or is the day of the small broker? I mean, if there was 40 of them, I don't know how many there are today, but there used to be some in Calgary, but even those have gone. Do you think we'll get another cycle where 4 or 5 guys could go out and do that?
No, and I mean, you're now in the investment counseling business. When they had that dinner that you were at for celebrating the 50 years of the society, I was talking to all the old timers, and they said, when we just went off, we didn't know what the hell we were doing. We just jumped in, and you and Murray really didn't have the background or anything. You just felt you could form a firm. I don't think you could form an investment counseling firm on that basis. Matter of fact, I use that in some talks on the Lieutenant Governor's wine tour, because everybody always says there's no entrepreneurism in Canada. But you guys were all entrepreneurs that just dumped into the deep end of the pool and formed a company and just grew it from there. And that was true for the brokers. I don't think you could do it in your industry anymore, and I just don't think it'd possibly do it in the brokerage business. All the electronic stuff and everything you have to have, I don't think you could do it.
Yeah. So I got to ask you about markets, because I know people here are going to ask you if I don't. So you've seen more cycles up close than probably anybody in this room. Yeah. Are you? What are you doing in the market these days? Are you comfortable with stocks, or do you own any bonds?
Well, I forgot. What is a bond again? I know I'm supposed to know what it is. I can't remember. No, I don't own any bonds. I'm still owning stocks. I would comment that the stuff that's in the media is just hopeless. I keep charts and a whole bunch of stocks that I follow, and if the Globe and Mail, for instance, writes up this stock as something really interesting, I'm going to put a mark on my chart that Globe and Mail had big tout, and it's just amazing. You look at the stock, big tout, and the stock starts declining. Globe and Mail has all these screens that are running, no background to say whether the screen works or not, no follow-up. The Sun was full of reports a while back about Mogo, this local finance company that has full-page ads in the paper, and what a wonderful thing it was. It had just come out at $10 and was then trading at $3.50 or something. In a matter of months, it's now trading around $1.10 or $20 or something. No follow-up on it. I was reading in the AAII journal, they're interviewing one of the big, huge, well-known fund managers, and they're asking him, what should you do if you're managing your own account? And he says, don't watch CNBC. He says, they hate you. They're trying to make you poor. And that's Kramer. He says he watches Kramer, but he turns the sound off. So I'm fully invested. Obviously stocks are trading at a high price. Bill Sharp, who did all that work on beta, which is wrong, and has the Sharp ratio, which is crazy. I've tried to get him to change his name to Bill Dull, but he refuses to do it. They're just not recognizing that interest rates are so low. Of course, the price-earnings ratio is higher, and there's a lot of good things going on. I don't know what the market's going to do over the next 6 months or a year. Remember, we tried to come up with some indicators at Leith Wheeler. We went through 10 or 15 of them. I back-tested all of them. There was only one that worked slightly, and that was on the VIX index. But the correlation was so low that it was so close to random. I didn't know enough statistics to know whether it even meant anything. There just isn't anything that indicates what the market's going to do. So I'll be in there until it starts to look really awful, and then I'll be out of there. Who was it? Morgan Stanley just came out and said the market's headed for a big drop. Their analysts got credit for predicting the drop in 2000, 2001. And he did predict it in 1996. The market more than doubled when he first started that prediction. He repeated it in 97, 98, 99. He repeated it in 2000, and he was a hero. So I don't know what the market's going to do. I think there's lots of good stocks out there, and I love owning them. And
Right. When I first met Mike, it was a job interview. He was interviewing me for a job, and we were having lunch. And I said, this is where I got my first lesson in the market, when Mike said to me, Bill, in the market as in life, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And I figured, okay, either I'm paying, or Mike doesn't believe that he believes the market's pretty efficient. What do you think works, Mike?
First of all, I think the market is efficient. The efficient market hypothesis is being disproven because it was never properly worded in the first place. I said this to a professor at a university that also believes in the efficient market hypothesis. I said, well, you can disprove it because it wasn't written properly. He says, yeah, you set up a straw man and you knock him over, which is so true. So all of the information is in there. I'll tell you something shocking. I'll see if I can shock this audience just for the hell of it. I think the average portfolio manager, or most portfolio managers, and certainly all financial analysts, waste about 80% of their time working at work. They're looking at metrics and things that really aren't all that important. There was a wonderful experiment a guy did. He believes that one way to beat the market is to avoid the biggest cap stocks. So he was going to give a speech, and he took the S&P 500 and he divided all of the weightings by price to sales, price to book, price to earnings, all this stuff. and created portfolios. So he came up with portfolios that were much more value portfolios, and it beat the market by about 2.4% per annum. And he said, that proves all I've done is really change at the top. And he said, well, I'm going to give a speech. I'm going to do something else. I'm going to use inverted indicators. So now he multiplied by the price-earnings ratio to get so that the stocks with high price-earnings ratios had higher weighting in the S&P index. And he found he beat the market by about 2.4% per year. So it didn't seem to matter whether you used high valued stocks or value in quotes or low valued stocks. So I think a lot of the information that we're looking at is wrong. Corporate governance is incredibly important, and we have very poor tools of getting at it. 50 years from now, somebody would be sitting in this chair and saying, you wouldn't believe what they did 50 years ago to look at corporate governance.
Maybe we should open to questions, and I think there's a mic runner somewhere. Two of them? Okay. So do we have any questions from the audience?
You say currently you're fully invested, so I would assume that means you're always trying to increase the quality of your portfolio, the stocks you look at. What would your turnover be? How many stocks would you be comfortable owning in a universe?
Interesting question, especially about turnover. I know it's terribly important to invest for the long term because it's in all of the marketing material from every portfolio manager. And yet you look at their turnover rates and they tend to be around 30%, so they really aren't investing for the long term. I'm highly influenced by momentum, and as you probably know, that does result in higher turnover. So I don't know what mine is. I suspect it's around 50% or something higher. I really never measured that. I'm just trying to find stocks that I think really have quality and future. And I owned some Valiant Pharmaceuticals for a while, and then when that hit the fan, I just said that this company is totally crooked. I didn't know that. I didn't find any analysts that told me what their business plan was, but I was out of there, and shortly after I bought it, just because it had changed.
So how many stocks would you think you need to be comfortably diversified?
Well, I've tried to keep my portfolio small enough that I'll be able to remember what I own. But I have more than 3 stocks, so I'm trying to keep around 15 stocks. For a while, when I was changing things around, and one of my portfolios had very little money, I did get down to 3 stocks, and it's crazy. So yeah, I try to get around 15 to 18 stocks. But I'm not a typical investor. I'm not saying that this works for a portfolio manager. Is
there any other?
Michael, you've had obviously a lot of individual stock investments over the years. If you could perhaps talk about 1 or 2 that were really sure things, really, really good opportunities over the years. Where were the slam dunks in your career, and what did you see at the time?
Oh, that is a tough one. I'm trying to remember the name of the stock that I only had one stock that I've owned for as long as 3 years. Stuff just floats by, and it's interesting. It has promise at the time. I look at it, and often I'm wrong, and I pack it up. I really don't think in the terms of what you're asking in the question, so I really don't have an answer for it.
Yeah, I've never had an investment that's a slam dunk. They've all sweated, sweated me for years before they've worked.
Yes.
Uh-oh, here comes Barry Gosney's question.
Yeah. Give him a
Get him a mic.
microphone so we can understand his accent.
I missed that comment, but I'm fortunate enough when I came to this country, and I was on the administrative side, incidentally, rounding out your comments of, back in 1954. One of the bucket shops, as you'll recall, was Davidson Company. Those are the big players. But in reference to what is the slam dunk, because I happened to join with Mike in Ryan Investments, and a situation happened on the stock exchange, and he said, let's have coffee. We went downstairs, he said, look, a situation's happened today with Harding Carpets, and this is a slam dunk, he said. And I said, how come, Mike? Well, he said, they've just announced that they are issuing a preferred, a 7.5% preferred, to all the shareholders. So this, he said, is money is really in the corporate finance and the shareholders' pocket already. And he said, the stock has just dropped $7.50. He said, and that was the lack of sophistication then, because he said, there's no earnings change. Nothing has changed in the common shares. The corporation is running normal. All they've done is capitalized from their earned surplus to give the shareholders a preferred share. And that was all that was to it. And that introduced Mike to the carpet industry, which with Murray Leith, you will recall, became a major participation in that industry at the time when the technology was moving away from the woolen industry to the synthetics, and it was a revelation in the industry. But Mike, that was your slam dunk to me. Thank you.
Actually, I do remember the first stock when I started picking stocks for Leith Wheeler was Buffet's. And I thought this stock was just absolutely terrific. It certainly didn't sit well with Murray because it was too exciting. So they decided I'd have to go down to the States. I went down with Dave Giles. We looked at a couple of companies, and
You had to eat at the cafe, did you?
well, I was going to kick the tires, and so being really smart, I said, what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask to talk to the manager, and I'm going to go in around 10:30 because that'll be the shoulder period. Breakfast will be over, lunch hasn't started yet. The manager will have time to talk to me and explain everything. So I went down to the local Buffet's restaurant at 10:30. The lineup was around the corner of people waiting to get in, and I thought, this is a slam dunk. But they didn't. We didn't buy it, and it actually was a terrific stock for quite a long time.
Mike holds a grudge. Tom?
Mike, lots of young minds here in the room. When you worked with young people at Leith, or just think about it now, what are the barriers that get in the way for them to deliver good results and do the right things?
I'm sorry, I didn't totally get your question.
What are the barriers that get in the way of people, young, smart people, delivering good results?
Oh, yeah. Well, one of them we discussed shortly when we were talking before. It's just a natural human nature. You get married to your good ideas. You get married to your stocks. And I've talked to so many portfolio managers or analysts or stocks doing poorly. They say, yeah, but it's a great company. It's going to come around. I know the people. I've talked to the president, and he bought me lunch. And that's just a human quality there that's tough. I think it's very hard to run against the crowd, that to really, and I know your firm is definitely doing a very unique kind of job. Tough to do that. Everybody likes to talk about government, their big bureaucracies. A lot of the investment managers are big bureaucracies, and I think that is an impediment. First of all, for every buyer there's a seller, and for every seller there's a buyer. That's basically. And if your company's buying a bunch of stock, or your investment advisory company, chances are you're buying it from another investment advisory company, because they control roughly 80 or 85% of all the trading. Now that's a no-sum game. Fortunately, the leakage, the cost of running the game is much smaller than it used to be. But that's a problem there too, that you're just always competing against other people who are as educated, as trained, and hopefully as disciplined as you are, but probably not. So I don't know if that's a thorough answer, but I think that's where it starts.
Good. Should you take one more question?
Yeah, Michael, what I was wondering about, buying a stock is very easy, selling is very difficult. And what I wanted to know was, what are the things that make you want to sell a stock and sell it and stop being married to it?
I am very heavily influenced by momentum, and I have stock after stock on my charts that I've owned, and they've stopped performing for 5-6 months, started dropping down. The analysts rated a strong buy. 80% of the analysts are recommending it, and 19% are calling it a hold, and 1% calling it a sell. They don't know what's going on. I think something's going wrong in that company, and I can show you time after time when that has worked. I can also show you a lot of times when it didn't work. I can show you a number of errors I've made, and I say to all the kids out at university, if you're afraid of making errors, switch into a trade school, because in finance you've got to be prepared to make errors. It's a batting average game. So that's where I really start, and then I think with news events, you've got to look at each one of them and decide whether it has legs or whether it's just passing. I mean, I mentioned Valiant. When I found out what they were doing, I thought, this is a disaster. It's just going to keep getting worse and getting worse. The same with Nortel, way back when Nortel dropped from, $130 or something, ultimately into bankruptcy. I bought it twice. I bought it after it had already dropped about 60%, and then it kept dropping, and I sold it because I thought, there's something else wrong here. And again I bought it, and again I sold it at a loss, and it finally went bankrupt. The company was rotten right through the core. So you got to look for those things. You just look for. I think you get warning signals. Everybody says, why do you look at charts? I mean, they don't mean anything. Why do of all the leading indicators, is the stock market the only one that tends to predict what's going to happen to the economy? It's something to do with things not changing abruptly, but starting to change. The stock market is so price sensitive that it shows up there before anybody else has figured it out. I think it does that in stocks too. So that's really, I have no hesitation in selling a stock. I have no love whatsoever for any stock that I own. They're just pieces of paper. All you're doing is buying price change. So that's how I treat them.
On that
Alan wants to ask a question.
Okay, last question.
Mike, thank you on behalf of all the old Pimadonians. You did a great job. Well done.
Now, that was the best question all night.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your time this evening. It's been very enjoyable. I think a round of applause.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Mike. Thank you.
I first met Mike Ryan when I started my first career job, which was at Pemberton Securities in the mid-1980s. And he was this tall, distinguished-looking gentleman, always dressed to the nines, often with a bow tie, and used to drive around town in his convertible green Mercedes, vintage, very funky. And that's in fact how I would describe Mike. He's a perfect gentleman. He's always been a gentleman, very kind-hearted, and always quick with a smile or a joke to help ease the way. Mike has always been a tremendous supporter of the industry, as evidenced by him being a founding member of the Vancouver Society, and also particularly passionate about young people who are interested in the business, as evidenced by him being a founding member also of the Portfolio Management Foundation at UBC. I was fortunate to work with Mike again in 1994 when I joined Leith Wheeler, and truly always enjoyed my time with Mike. His door was always open and quick to share a joke and able to go in and chat with him anytime. He would just listen or give advice if I asked for it. And anyone who ever worked with Mike knows one of the best things about visiting his office was he always had a huge jar of jelly beans on his desk. So Mike again has been a tremendous supporter of the Vancouver CFA Society, and the Society's been very fortunate to have him.
I met him in 1978 when I started at Pemberton Securities, and immediately I thought, I've met somebody fantastic, not just because of his financial smarts, but just his presence and his stature and his straight back. And he would walk into a room and you think, oh, I really need to get to know that person, and he's somebody you would always, always remember. And he just impressed me. And I have a great remembrance, especially of when his secretary, they were called secretaries then, Betty McGowan, good friend of mine, and I went to New York for the first time. And that would have been around 1981 or 82. And we were so excited. We hadn't been before, and as luck would have it, Mike was there on business. So we were excited because he knew New York like the back of his hand, especially jazz clubs. He loved live music and especially jazz. And so he took us around to all his favorite haunts, and one night he was particularly excited because he found out that one of his favorite jazz icons, Joe Jones, was going to be playing. He was a drummer, and he was going to be in a little place up the Upper East Side. And he says, we're going. So we were sure, we don't know him. So we hopped in a cab, went up to this jazz place, and how do you know this guy, Joe Jones? Well, everybody should know him. He's awesome. I saw him 32 years ago at the Preservation Hall Jazz Club in New Orleans, and that was 32 years, and he blew the roof off, and I can't believe he's here in New York, and I haven't, it's been so long. So we got excited because he was so excited. We walked into the jazz club, just a small place, and sure enough, this Joe Jones, now in his early 70s maybe, hobbles up onto the stage, just kills the first set. It was awesome, and Mike was just beaming to see his hero up there. And we were all excited too. So anyway, after the first set, Joe hobbles off the stage, walks towards our table, and walks straight up to Mike and says, "Thank you for coming." I don't think I've seen you since 32 years ago at the Preservation Hall in New Orleans. And what can I say? Unforgettable. You remembered Mike, and that's the kind of guy Mike is. We were gobsmacked. Anyway, it was a great memory. Mike, you know, I cherish it, and there's been so many other great memories, so love you. All the best.
I used to work for Mike Ryan back in the day, probably about 1974 to 1978. Poor Mike probably had to deal with me when I was a lot younger and a lot more, what's energetic might be a better term for it, you know, cheeky. I was cheeky. I was very, very cheeky. So he had to endure that. I caught him one time saying that Betty McGowan was a wonderful secretary to work for. And that was me. I was bossy, and I was just sort of, you know, life was unfolding as it should. But Mike also introduced me to a lot of things that as a younger person in my 20s at that time, didn't really know. And so he introduced me to good coffee. He introduced me to cocktails. He introduced me to jazz. He introduced me to a lot of things that were very sophisticated at the time that I didn't really know about. So I think I have to say thank you very much to Mike for those introductions that he gave me when I was younger. And pretty, you know, I wanted to learn, but I didn't necessarily have all of the structure. And Mike just sort of gave it to me. So I want to thank Mike for that.
I had the pleasure of working with Mike Ryan for 10 years at Leith Wheeler. I joined the company in 1993 and worked with him until his retirement in 2003. Mike was really the consummate investment professional. He's a person who had 50 years of experience in the investment industry, so Mike had literally been through pretty much every market you could possibly envisage. The one thing about the investment industry is you've got a lot of people here who are very enthusiastic about following companies and learning about markets, and there's very strong views on that. And quite often we'd have discussions in the company about adding in stocks into the portfolio, and the discussions would sometimes there'd be different views on a company. The beautiful thing about Mike was he was always a calming influence within the business. He was the person that could always focus the discussion on back to the investment disciplines that we had at Leith Wheeler. He could relate it to different market episodes that he'd been through in his career. He was a tremendous resource. Not only was he a mentor to myself, but he was a mentor to Murray Leith. In fact, he had a company, Ryan Investments, and he hired Murray Leith at one point, and then Murray had the opportunity to hire Mike. So Mike was really just the person within the company that always made the meetings go very, very smoothly, that brought the investment disciplines back to track. And because there's so much turmoil and emotion in the investment industry, Mike was a calming influence in quite often the storm, and would guide you through those turbulent times because of his historical knowledge. So all I can say, it was a real pleasure working with Mike, and I really enjoyed it.
I had the pleasure of starting work with Mike Ryan in July of 1971. At Ryan Investments. And I didn't fully realize it at the time, but he was an incredible contributor to the institutional investment community here in Vancouver and throughout the rest of Canada. I think the thing that I'll remember most about Mike is how unselfish he was on both a personal and professional basis, mentoring so many new entrants to the investment industry in Vancouver. He's had a huge impact on the financial community here. He was importantly involved in establishing Stevenson Ryan, an investment firm, Ryan Investments, Leith Wheeler Investment Council, and then along with my partners, Dave Roberts and Rusty Gopel, we established Gopel Shields in 1986. Thank you so much, Mike.
It's been a real pleasure to get to know Michael Ryan over the last several years. We've learned so much about him and his commitment to the society, and seen it over the past several events that he's been at. He continues to come out, he continues to interact with members, and he's been a pillar in the community. And we've all enjoyed his learning about how he started the society back 50 years ago. His commitment, his perseverance, and his resilience with the Institute really helped create the society in Vancouver here. Before that, there was no organization about financial management, and him and his leadership in creating the society has really spawned a cohesive group of financial planners and analysts in Vancouver. So much congratulations to Michael Ryan for what he's built, and as a leader of the society, it's a great honor to walk in the footsteps that he has built. So, thank you.